Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Pavitra is a specialist and soon to be associate professor of radiology and biomedical imaging at UCSF. She received her PhD in biochemistry at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. Pavitra was the recipient of the 2019 Women in Neuro-Oncology Basic and Translational Science Research Award. I invited her to give us a talk because I found her work in brain tumor research very interesting and inspiring. As many of you know, our carbon-13 polarizer will be delivered to the Martino Center in a few months. So I feel the timing of her talk is perfect. Without further ado, here is Pavitra.
Thanks, Yifen, for that really kind introduction and really for the opportunity to speak today. Like Yifen said, my background is in biochemistry, so I'm very much a biologist. But I've also been working with Sabrina Ronan at UCSF for the last several years. So I also have a background in metabolic imaging and primarily in hyperpolarized C13 imaging for brain tumors. And my goal really is to bring the two together and see if we can leverage an understanding of cancer genomics and biology, translate that into an understanding of metabolism, which can then be used for the identification of metabolic imaging biomarkers and therapeutic targets for brain tumors. So I'll start with an outline of my talk. I will first introduce cancer genomics and how it interfaces with metabolism, then give you an overview of the vision for my research program, and then give you a couple of examples from my research work that illustrate how we can make this vision a reality. The primary focus of my research so far has been on brain tumors, and all the work I will present is on brain tumors. But keep in mind that the logic and the approaches are equally applicable to other kinds of cancers and probably to other diseases as well. So this slide shows you an infographic of brain tumor statistics. This year, about 80,000 people roughly will be diagnosed with primary brain tumor in the United States. The number is about 1.4 million worldwide. One particularly striking fact is that survival rates for brain tumors haven't changed in the last 30 years. They've gone up by maybe about 1%. And just for comparison, prostate cancer survival rates have gone up by about 36% and breast cancer by about 18%. So what this essentially means is that brain tumors rank among the least survivable of all cancers. And if you take the primary brain tumors as a whole, the 5-year survival rate is less than 30%. And if you take just the high-grade glioblastomas, it's really pathetic. It's about 6% or so. So you can see that there is a real need to identify processes that are important to tumor proliferation, as well as non-invasive imaging methods that will inform on these molecular processes, as well as therapeutics that target them. Traditionally, brain tumors have been classified by histology and graded in increasing order of malignancy. So grades 1 to 3 are typically considered lower grade gliomas, and they tend to have a favorable patient prognosis, whereas the grade 4 gliomas are very aggressive and they typically have very poor patient prognosis. But we now know that gliomas that are histologically very similar actually have very different genetic profiles. They have very different diseases at the genetic level. And I think that is illustrated really nicely on this slide, where you can see, where you can look at all the molecular pathways in gliomagenesis and know that tumors that look similar by histology actually have very different oncogenic profiles. And the key insight that drives much of my work is the fact that genomics translates into metabolism. So what I've done on this slide is to highlight with stars all those oncogenic events that are also linked to metabolism. And you can see that better on this slide, where you can see how different oncogenes and tumor suppressors interface with different metabolic pathways. And this is, in fact, the basis of the assertion that metabolic reprogramming is a central hallmark of cancer. So with that introduction in mind, I will give you a short overview of the vision for my research program and what I think we stand to gain by understanding metabolism. So the overall goal of my research program is to harness insights from tumor genetics, epigenetics, and biology to drive the preclinical development of novel metabolic imaging biomarkers and therapeutic targets for brain tumors. And the way we go about doing this is to look at preclinical, genetically engineered, and patient-derived tumor models that reflect a particular oncogenic event, build an understanding of the associated metabolism by using tools like proton and C13 MRS and mass spectrometry, and now use this information as the springboard for the identification of novel metabolic imaging biomarkers. We primarily work with proton and hyperpolarized C13 MRS, and we are now also in the process of setting up deuterium metabolic imaging. And another aspect that we hope to achieve is to use an understanding of metabolism to identify actionable therapeutic targets. And last but not least, we would like to validate our imaging biomarkers and therapeutic targets by identifying the molecular mechanisms that connect the oncogenic event to these biomarkers and therapeutic targets. So what do we hope to gain by this exercise? It's a little bit like preaching to the choir, but I'll try to outline what I think we can gain by doing this. First up is patient selection. We are now in the age of precision medicine. And one of the central tenets of personalized medicine is this idea of pre-treatment genomic analysis. The idea is to understand the individual patient's genome and tailor the treatment accordingly. Now, increasingly, a lot of studies are looking at seeing whether we can do this by looking at circulating tumor DNA or circulating tumor cells. And while this is successful for some cancers, studies indicate that this cannot be done for brain tumors. It looks like we have to actually be able to access the cerebrospinal fluid and not just blood. And that's a bit more complicated than just looking at DNA or cells from blood. So you can see that there is a logic to be able to do a non-invasive metabolic imaging readout of the tumor genome. And once the patient has been identified and treated, we need to be able to monitor response to therapy. And this is one area where MRS, and particularly hyperpolarized C13 MRS, I think has a big role to play, because we know that from a lot of studies in gliomas as well as in prostate and other cancers, we know that hyperpolarized C13 MRS is good at giving us an early readout of response to therapy. And one of the things that we are interested in is seeing if we can use hyperpolarized C13 MRS to distinguish true tumor response from treatment-related effects like pseudoprogression and pseudoresponse. And I think another advantage would be that we would be able to evaluate the development of resistance to therapy. Something else that we could potentially understand by via metabolic imaging is to assess tumor heterogeneity. We all know that heterogeneity is a big problem in cancer. And especially in glioblastomas. And since oncogenic events are linked to metabolism, the logic is that mutational heterogeneity can translate into metabolic heterogeneity. And by looking at metabolic imaging from different regions of the tumor, you could potentially understand, get a sense of intratumoral heterogeneity. And last but not least is this idea of targeting cancer metabolism, which is actually not new. The first anti-cancer drug, in fact, was an anti-metabolite. It was methotrexate, which targeted folate metabolism. And then I think came the discovery of the oncogenes and the promise that if we target them directly, we would have a cure for cancer. And that's been partially successful, but I think increasingly we are now turning back to targeting metabolism for anti-cancer therapy. So with that vision and impact, I will now talk about a couple of projects that I've worked on, which hopefully will give you a sense of how I hope to translate this vision. The first project I will talk to you about revolves around exploiting the IDH1 mutation for imaging and therapy in low-grade gliomas. The IDH1 mutation has really changed the way we look at brain tumors. We now know that about 70 to 90% of all low-grade gliomas carry a mutation in isocitrate dehydrogenase 1 or IDH1. And in fact, according to the latest World Health Organization 2016 classification, a tumor is considered a low-grade glioma if it has an IDH1 mutation. And we know that these mutations are the earliest genetic alterations in these tumors, and they really kickstart tumorigenesis. So what does the IDH1 mutation do? The wild-type IDH1 enzyme converts isocitrate to alpha-ketoglutarate, whereas the mutant enzyme converts alpha-ketoglutarate to 2-hydroxyglutarate or 2-HG. Now, 2-HG is what is known as an oncometabolite because it inhibits the activity of a variety of alpha-ketoglutarate dependent enzymes, many of which are involved in modulating the epigenetic status of the cell. So these are histone methylases, DNA methylases, and the end result of 2-HG inhibiting the activity of these enzymes is that there is what is known as a hypermethylation phenotype. And there's a lot of gene expression which is altered. And we now know that this is important to initiate tumorigenesis in these tumor types. So our idea was to see if there are metabolic changes beyond the production of 2-HG that occur in IDH mutant cells. And we, when we first started this project, to be sure that we are looking at metabolic changes that are specific to the IDH mutation and are not simply due to the genetic background of the cell, we started with genetically engineered models. So we took either immortalized normal human astrocytes or U87 cells, and looked at two kinds of cell lines, cells expressing either the IDH wild-type enzyme or those expressing the IDH mutant enzyme. And once we had some initial data in these models, we also confirmed our results in patient-derived IDH mutant models. So these are the BT142 and BT54 models, which were isolated from patient-derived tumors. On this slide, you can see proton MRS spectra, which give you a readout of steady state metabolite levels in IDH wild type and IDH mutant cells. And to be sure that we weren't being biased and just picking and choosing the metabolites that we like, we subjected the data to principal component analysis. And on the right side, you can see that the metabolic profiles of IDH wild type and IDH mutant cells segregate quite well from each other. And when you actually look at the metabolites that are responsible for this discrimination, you can see that beyond the production of 2-HG, there is a broader metabolic reprogramming. And specifically, there is a drop in the levels of three metabolites: glutamate, lactate, and phosphocholine. And in the subsequent work, what we tried to do was to see if we can exploit each one of these for metabolic imaging or therapy. And today I will mainly talk about the story around glutamate. So when we saw that steady state glutamate levels were reduced in IDH mutant cells relative to IDH wild type cells, the first question we asked was, where does this drop come from? Now, when we look at glutamate levels within the cell, glutamate can be derived either from glutamine via glutaminolysis, or it can be derived from glucose via glycolysis and the TCA cycle. So we then labeled cells with either 1C13 glucose or 3C13 glutamine and traced flux to C13 labeled glutamate by thermally polarized C13 MRS. you can see representative C13 spectra here. So on the left, you see spectra from IDH wild type and mutant cells showing conversion of 3C13 glutamine to 3C13 glutamate. And in the middle, you can see spectra from IDH wild type and IDH mutant cells that have been labeled with 1C13 glucose, and you can see production of 4C13 glutamate. Now, if you focus on the bar graph on the right, just focus on the dotted regions, what you will see is that there is no change in glutamine-derived glutamate between IDH wild type and IDH mutant cells. It looks like the drop in glutamate levels in IDH mutant cells primarily derived from a drop in glucose-derived glutamate. When you then look at the pathway of glucose metabolism to glutamate, one of the rate-limiting enzymes is pyruvate dehydrogenase, or PDH. And we know from work in the cancer metabolism field in general that PDH activity is quite tightly regulated in normal cells as well as in tumor cells. So then we asked whether PDH activity is altered in IDH mutant cells, and you can see that quite clearly there's a significant drop in PDH activity in IDH mutant cells relative to IDH wild type cells. So the question then becomes, is there some way we can non-invasively monitor this reduction in PDH activity in IDH mutant cells? And the answer is yes, we can do this by hyperpolarized C13 MRS. This audience probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will say that hyperpolarization is a method of enhancing the signal to noise ratio of C13 MRS by about 10,000 fold. And it is based on the principle that the electron spin polarization electron spins are highly polarized at low temperature and high magnetic field. And it is possible to transfer this polarization to C13 nuclei, which are usually not polarized very well, by microwave irradiation in the presence of a paramagnetic radical. And with the development of dissolution dynamic nuclear polarization, what we are now able to do is to dissolve this hyperpolarized C13 agent in isotonic buffer at room temperature. And we can now inject it into biological systems and quantify fluxes to products in a very rapid fashion in real time. So what this slide shows you is how a hyperpolarized experiment looks like when we do it with live perfused cells. So we take a C13 label compound, mix it with a paramagnetic radical, and put it in the polarizer. And typically, it's polarized for about an hour or an hour and a half. And meanwhile, we take cells, make a cell suspension out of them. And if you wanted to, you can do it in a cell suspension, or you could choose to encapsulate them in agarose or grow them on microcarrier beads and put them in what we call a perfusion system so that the cells are continuously perfused with media. This keeps them viable. This is then placed in a scanner. And once the polarization is done, we have to very quickly inject the hyperpolarized agent into the perfusion system. And we can now obtain dynamic C13 MRS spectra in real time. And the whole process is usually over in about 5 minutes. So you have dynamic metabolic data in real time. If you're doing experiments with live animals, like tumor-bearing animals, the animal is placed in the scanner. And the hyperpolarized agent can now be injected via the tail vein through a catheter. And you can again acquire dynamic C13 spectra. And this time you can also overlay the data on a T2 weighted anatomical image so that you can now look at the metabolic, at the spatial distribution of your substrate and your product in real time across the brain. To come back to the IDH1 mutation, the question we were asking was, is there some way to monitor PDH activity non-invasively? And if you think about the metabolic pathway, you can do this using hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate. 2C13 pyruvate, when it is shunted through PDH into the TCA cycle, it becomes 5C13 glutamate. So by monitoring 5C13 glutamate production, you can get a readout of PDH activity. On this slide, the spectral array here shows you that we can quantify the dynamic production of 5C13 glutamate in live cells. And when we sum all the C13 spectra, essentially get a total signal for 5C13 glutamate, and now compare it between IDH wild type and IDH mutant cells, you can see that there is a significant reduction in 5C13 glutamate production, which actually parallels the reduction in PDH activity that I showed you earlier. So this data essentially tells us that hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate can give you a readout of the IDH1 mutation-induced downregulation of PDH activity in low-grade gliomas. Now, I told you at the outset that metabolism can be used for imaging as well as for therapy. Now, dichloroacetate, or DCA, is a small molecule. It's a pyruvate analog, which is actually used as a tool compound to inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase kinase, which in turn inhibits PDH activity. So essentially, what DCA will do is to activate PDH. And in line with the fact that IDH mutant cells have reduced PDH activity relative to IDH wild type cells, they really don't seem to like having their PDH activated. So treating these cells with dichloroacetate really inhibits their clonogenicity more than with IDH wild type cells. Clonogenicity is simply a measure of the ability of these cells to form tumors in animals. Now, one of the nice things about hyperpolarized C13 MRS is also the fact that once you have the ability to monitor a metabolic reaction, if you have a therapeutic for that reaction, you also now have a companion imaging biomarker for the therapeutic. So what the data here shows you that we can use hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate to non-invasively monitor response to dichloroacetate. So I've already shown you that relative to wild type cells, mutant cells have reduced 5C13 glutamate production. And when you treat these cells with dichloroacetate, you can see that the effect on clonogenicity is paralleled by an increase in 5C13 glutamate production. So essentially, hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate can monitor response to dichloroacetate. So how is any of this relevant to a patient? So this slide shows you how the preclinical work that I've shown you so far has actually made an impact on translation to the clinic. This is not work that I've done. This is work from Dan Vigneron at UCSF. He and his colleagues are now translating hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate to IDH mutant glioma patients. And this is some initial data from a patient with a grade 2 IDH mutant glioma. The yellow voxel is a voxel placed over the tumor, whereas the blue voxel is the normal brain. And you can see that consistent with what I've shown you so far, glutamate levels are much lower in the tumor relative to the normal brain. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that preclinical studies of hyperpolarized C13 biomarkers do have value in building a rationale for translation to the clinic. And there's also a rationale here for looking at hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate to monitor potentially response to therapy in low-grade glioma patients. So I will summarize this part of the work by saying that we started out by looking at the IDH1 mutation. We wanted to understand the metabolism, and we figured out that the IDH1 mutation reduces glutamate levels in a manner that is associated with reduced PDH activity. We then figured out that this is a potential therapeutic target by using dichloroacetate as a tool compound. And we think that hyperpolarized 2C13 pyruvate can be used to both non-invasively monitor the IDH1 mutation and potentially response to therapy. I will now move on and talk about some of the more recent work I've done. This time it revolves around imaging telomere maintenance in low-grade gliomas. If you go back to one of the original slides that I showed you, which illustrates all the molecular pathways in gliomagenesis, one of the most notable features is mutations in telomerase reverse transcriptase, or TERT. TERT promoter mutations, which reactivate TERT expression, are characteristic of about 83% of high-grade primary glioblastomas and about 78% of low-grade oligodendrogliomas. And TERT is essential for what is known as telomere maintenance in cancer. Telomeres are these capped structures at our chromosomal ends that shorten with every cell division until the cell undergoes either senescence or apoptosis. And so you can see that by definition, all cancer cells need to come up with a mechanism of maintaining telomere length. And that is why telomere maintenance is considered a hallmark of cancer. TERT is the catalytic component of the enzyme telomerase, which synthesizes these telomeres. And we now know that TERT promoter mutations are a defining characteristic of both the glioblastomas and low-grade oligodendrogliomas. You can imagine that because it is so essential to tumor proliferation, TERT is also a therapeutic target. And in fact, work from some of our collaborators at the UCSF Brain Tumor Center shows that inhibiting TERT expression from the mutant TERT promoter is a therapeutic strategy for gliomas. But there's always a catch, and there are other studies that show that inhibiting TERT can lead to the development of resistance via what is known as the alternative lengthening of telomeres, or ALT pathway. This is simply a non-TERT dependent method of telomere synthesis. And what is also interesting is that ALT is also the telomere maintenance mechanism, which is naturally used by the low-grade astrocytomas. Mutations in a particular protein called ATRX are essential for development of the ALT pathway. And ATRX mutations are in fact a defining feature of the low-grade astrocytomas. Just like TERT, ALT is also a therapeutic target. And in fact, brain-penetrant inhibitors of the ALT pathway in gliomas have been identified. So essentially, you have the two major classes of low-grade gliomas, the oligodendrogliomas and the astrocytomas, and they use two different telomere maintenance mechanisms, either TERT or ALT. And our logic is that if we could identify non-invasive metabolic imaging biomarkers of TERT or ALT status, we would be able to monitor tumor burden and response to therapy in these tumors. So why do we even think TERT or ALT? These are telomere maintenance mechanisms. They function in the nucleus. Why do we even think they have anything to do with metabolism? The reason is that there have been studies over the last decade in gliomas as well as in other cancers, which show that TERT has functions beyond telomere maintenance, and in particular, it has been linked to alterations in redox. So TERT has been shown to control levels of NAD, NADH, as well as reduced glutathione in cancer. And so with that rationale in mind, we decided to go ahead and see if TERT and ALT are linked to metabolic changes in low-grade gliomas. Just like with the IDH1 mutation, when we first started, we wanted to be sure that our metabolic biomarkers are specifically linked to TERT or ALT status and are not simply because of the different genetic backgrounds we are looking at. So we again took the immortalized normal human astrocytes, and this time we looked at three different kinds of cells. Control cells, which do not have a telomere maintenance mechanism, and cells that use either TERT expression or the ALT pathway for telomere maintenance. And once we had some data in these cells, we then went ahead and looked at patient-derived models. We looked at one oligodendroglioma and one astrocytoma model. You can see a representative proton MRS spectrum on this slide. And when we look at the proton MRS detectable metabolite levels and segregate the data by subject the data to principal component analysis, you can see that the controlled TERT and ALT cells have metabolic profiles that segregate from each other. And when we drill down into the data to identify the metabolites that are discriminating between these cell lines, we find that elevated levels of reduced glutathione or GSH, NADPH, aspartate, and AXP discriminate TERT cells from control and alt cells, whereas elevated levels of glutamate, alpha-ketoglutarate, alanine, and AXP are responsible for discriminating alt cells from control and TERT cells. And since we cannot distinguish between NADH and NADPH by proton MRS, proton MRS is agnostic to the phosphate moiety, we used spectrophotometric assays to confirm that individually, both NADH and NADPH are elevated in TERT cells relative to control and alt cells. And this is consistent with what is known in the literature, which links TERT to altered redox, and specifically to a higher redox capacity. So we then set out to see if we can exploit these different metabolic profiles for non-invasive imaging. And what I will show you is data to show that we can use the fact that alpha-ketoglutarate levels are elevated in all cells and NADH is elevated in TERT cells to be able to do some hyperpolarized C13 imaging of oligodendrogliomas and astrocytomas. Now, when you look at hyperpolarized alanine metabolism within the cell, alanine comes into the cell and it's converted to pyruvate in a reaction that requires alpha-ketoglutarate. Whereas for pyruvate to further become lactate, you need NADH. And this is very convenient for us because I've just shown you that alpha-ketoglutarate and NADH are differentially regulated between TERT and alt cells. So on the right here, you can see a spectral array of hyperpolarized alanine metabolism when it is injected into live perfused alt cells. You can see that the alanine comes in and it gets converted to pyruvate, but further conversion to lactate is rather limited. And this is consistent with the fact that these cells have a lot of alpha-ketoglutarate, but limiting levels of NADH. When you inject hyperpolarized alanine into TERT cells, you can see that alanine comes in, becomes pyruvate, and now the pyruvate is very rapidly getting converted to lactate. And this is consistent with the fact that these cells have a lot of NADH that is available for this conversion. So with that cell data in hand, we then moved in vivo. This slide shows you data from rats carrying orthotopic alt tumor xenografts. To begin with, we started by looking at a slab through the brain, which includes the tumor, and simply acquiring dynamic C13 MRS spectra from the slab. When you look at the spectral array, you can see alanine coming in and getting converted to pyruvate and to lactate. And consistent with the cell data, it is pyruvate which is the predominant peak. And if you look at the dynamic curves on the right, you can see that there is a temporal shift between the maximum for the alanine and the maximum for the pyruvate. And there is a further shift between the maximum for the pyruvate and the maximum for lactate. And this is important because when you look at metabolism of a hyperpolarized compound, particularly in the brain, one of the first questions we always get is, how do you know that the metabolism is actually happening in the brain? How do you know it's not just getting metabolized in the liver and coming in through the circulation? But the fact that you have a shift in time between the maxima for the substrate and for the products tells you that you're actually looking at real-time metabolism within the brain. At least it's one piece of evidence. This is data from rats carrying orthotopic TERT tumor xenografts. We again did a slab through the brain, including the tumor. And when you look at the spectral array, consistent with the cell data I've shown you, alanine becomes pyruvate and pyruvate becomes lactate. And this time it is lactate, which is the predominant peak. And again, when you look at the dynamic curves, you can see that there is a shift between the maxima for alanine, pyruvate, and lactate. Since the control cells, which do not have a telomere maintenance mechanism, they will not divide and therefore they will not form tumors in animals. As additional controls, we looked at tumor-free healthy rats. And here you can see that at least within the lifetime of the polarization, that same time scale as the other experiments, you can see only alanine. We are not able to see any metabolism of alanine to either pyruvate or to lactate. And so this is really the second piece of evidence to tell us that we are looking, with our tumor-bearing rats, we are looking at metabolism of alanine within the tumor in the brain. Because if it was simply getting metabolized in the liver and coming in with the circulation, you would expect to see it in the control animals as well. It's much easier to appreciate the data when you see it all on the same slide, side by side. So here you can see that control animals have just alanine. The alt animals convert alanine predominantly to pyruvate, whereas the TERT animals convert alanine predominantly to lactate. So this is all done in a slab, but ideally when you move into the clinic, you want to be able to do imaging. So to look simultaneously at both the tumor and the contralateral brain. So what we also did was we went ahead and did some EPSI imaging, 2D EPSI imaging in rats carrying orthotopic tumor xenografts. This is data from rats with alt tumor xenografts. The pink voxel is over the tumor. The blue voxel is over the normal brain. And you can see that consistent with the data from our cell models and from our slab studies, the normal brain voxel shows you the presence only of alanine, whereas in the tumor voxel, you can see a lot of pyruvate and a little bit of lactate. And when you go ahead and overlay the metabolic data over a T2 weighted MR image, and in this case, you can see that I've contoured the tumor with white lines. When you look at the distribution of substrate and product, you can see that alanine is distributed rather evenly throughout the brain. Whereas when you look at a ratio of pyruvate to lactate, it is specifically localized to the tumor region. So this tells us that we can potentially use hyperpolarized alanine to monitor tumor burden in alt tumors in vivo. But at this point, you're probably wondering that this is all very neat because it's all done in genetically engineered models. But what about patient-derived models where we know that there's more than one oncogenic event that is influencing metabolism? Does this still hold? This is data from BT142 tumors. These are patient-derived tumors that carry an IDH1 mutation. And again, you can see the pink voxel is the tumor and the blue is the normal brain. And you can see only alanine within the normal brain, whereas you can see a lot of pyruvate and a little bit of lactate within the tumor. And once again, when you look at the metabolic distribution, the spatial distribution of hyperpolarized alanine metabolism, you can see that alanine is again distributed throughout the brain, whereas the pyruvate to lactate serves to demarcate the tumor region. So based on this data, we think that hyperpolarized alanine flux to pyruvate is actually an imaging biomarker of alt status that can give you a readout of tumor burden in low-grade astrocytomas. But what about the TERT tumors? This is data from the genetically engineered TERT tumor xenografts. In this case, the red voxel is the tumor, the blue is again the normal brain. And consistent with our slab studies and with data from our cell suspensions, we see that there's only alanine within the normal brain, whereas we can see a little bit of pyruvate and a lot of lactate within the tumor region. And when we look at metabolic heat maps, the lactate to pyruvate ratio looks like it can give you a readout of tumor burden. And this is in genetically engineered tumors. What about patient-derived tumors? This is a low-grade oligodendroglioma tumor that was isolated at UCSF, the SF10417 tumors. And consistent with all the data I've shown you so far, when you do 2D EPSI imaging, you can see just alanine within the normal brain, and you can see pyruvate and more lactate than pyruvate in the tumor voxel. And when you overlay the metabolic data on the anatomical data, you can see that the lactate to pyruvate ratio is capable of demarcating the tumor from the surrounding contralateral brain in these tumors. So I will summarize this part of the work by saying that we set out to identify metabolic imaging biomarkers of genetic drivers of tumor proliferation, in this case, TERT and ALT status, we figured out that alpha-ketoglutarate levels are elevated in ALT cells, whereas NADH levels are elevated in TERT cells. And based on this data, we've identified hyperpolarized alanine as a potential probe of TERT or ALT status in oligodendrogliomas and astrocytomas. And I should say that hyperpolarized alanine was actually developed at UCSF in Dan Van Neuron's lab. It's been used to look at NADH levels in rat liver, but this is the first time it's actually being applied to cancer and certainly to brain tumors. And when you think about translational potential, the good thing about hyperpolarized alanine is that it is a neutral, non-toxic compound. It also has a relatively long T1, about 44 seconds at 3T, which is important when when you're trying to translate it to the clinic. And based on this data, we hope that in a few years, we will be able to take hyperpolarized alanine to the clinic with low-grade glioma patients. So I will conclude my presentation by saying that we now have a good understanding of cancer genomics and epigenomics, particularly with brain tumors, and altered cancer metabolism offers a unique opportunity for us to devise non-invasive imaging modalities. And there are multiple imaging modalities that are now available, and we hope that it can be tailored as needed so that soon, one day, we will be able to make precision imaging for neuro-oncology a reality. And this is the last and probably one of the most important slides. None of this work would have been possible without Sabrina Ronan, who's been my mentor at UCSF. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a fantastic set of colleagues and collaborators. And thank you for listening and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.